So this is from the second chapter of the new book, and the chapter is actually called Of Gods and Superheroes. And so I'm going to make three main points today in the talk. One is that moral agency is important for mental health and social belonging. Two is that my data suggests that using culturally available mythos is an adaptive strategy to preserve moral agency for young people overwhelmed by unusual mental events. And three is that we should consider the importance of shared cultural mythos for moral agency and create supports. And this may not make sense now, but hopefully it does by the end of my talk. All right, so just to introduce myself briefly, as you know, my name is Neely Myers, and this is a photo of my family. I'm about 14 years old here, and you can see in the photo is my younger brother, who shortly after this was diagnosed with childhood onset paranoid schizophrenia and taken out of the home by the state of Georgia and educated. And he's had a long life of institutional care, a big struggle with the mental health system. He's currently in prison. So all of my work is inspired by my family's experience with our broken and fragmented system of care. And everything that I do is an effort to try and help other young people and families live better lives in honor of my brother. So my intellectual project is both anthropological and clinical. I'm really interested in how social context shapes mental health and illness. And I'm interested in how social context shapes the experience, the understanding, the social response, the treatment, and outcomes for people experiencing serious mental distress. I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of identity politics around the topic that I study, and understandably so. Many people feel that they've been mislabeled or misrepresented in many ways by many different disciplines. And so these are some of the terms that I've come across in my research: consumers, service users, mad persons, users, refusers, and then people labeled as, people diagnosed with. So a variety of labels, and I just want to honor that. Today I've chosen to go with young adults who have experienced symptoms labeled as psychosis. And that's something I'll explain in a minute why, but that's the language for today. So when I talk about psychosis, I'm talking about people who've had experiences of different kinds of symptoms that are thought of as things that the rest of us don't experience. So here we have an image from the Prinzhorn Gallery at the University of Heidelberg. It's a collection of asylum art. We don't have an artist for this one. This is just drawing paper 7. But maybe you can see that in the image, this person is expressing an experience of having a radio operator shoot arrows of harm into their body, around their body, through their body. And it's an example of what might be labeled as a delusion, an idea that something out there is trying to harm someone that other people don't share. Most of us don't think that radio operators are shooting arrows of harm. So this is considered a positive symptom because it's something that someone believes that's in addition to their, the everyday experience that most of us have. And then another feature of psychosis is thought to be negative symptoms. And so they're called negative because it's thought that people are experiencing something less than what the rest of us experience. So maybe people who have psychosis are less motivated, or they have issues with experiencing pleasure. Or a lot of times people who have psychosis may have a very flat affect. They may not show a lot of facial expression, but when we look at neuroimaging studies, they're actually having very strong emotions, just not translating into their facial expression. And so as I study things that are labeled as psychosis, I use a dual approach. So I really wear two hats. One, I'm an anthropologist, and I'm interested in thinking about reading and applying and testing theories of human adaptation and flourishing. So how do people adapt to circumstances of everyday life, and how do they flourish in spite of them? And I do this across cultures. So I'm really interested in mental health and mental illness across cultures. I do work in East Africa, but I'm not talking about that today. And I'm also a mental health services researcher. So Tanya mentioned I've been funded by the NIH for a long time. And so I try to make practical applications of the theory that I developed based on the kinds of data that I collect. So how can systems of care try to help humans adapt? So the first point that I'd like to make today is that moral agency is important for mental health and social belonging. And this idea of moral agency really emerged from my first fieldwork project, which Tanya mentioned was in an undisclosed urban area of the US. And this fieldwork involved two different groups of people. One is that I really started with people who were talking about what it meant to have been labeled with schizophrenia or labeled with psychosis, and then to recover, what they were calling recovery, and lead meaningful lives in the community. So here are images of people who identify as people who've had schizophrenia. And so these include psychologists, psychiatrists. You may recognize Ellen Sachs there. She's a law professor at USC. And so I met these people first, and they were telling me about their experiences of recovery, despite having had a label of schizophrenia. And then I also did research in a clinic that was being run by people who had experiences of psychosis themselves. For them, a lot of them had experienced long-term disability as a result of having psychosis, so homelessness, addiction, and long-term medication treatment, long-term unemployment, things like that. And so that's really what the first book is about. And in doing this research, both with the people at the top, this top-down idea of recovery, and from the bottom up, looking at the people in the community trying to learn how to recover, I found that moral agency was really important for mental health. And so when I say moral agency, I'm building on the work of Arthur Kleinman, Tanya Lerman, Erica Blacksher, Angela Garcia. So you know some of these people, I think. Norma Ware, Kim Hopper, Sue Estra, Cheryl Mattingly, this great group of anthropologists who've been looking at these issues for a long time. And when I say moral, I chose moral not because of some larger ethical code that's pressed down on people, but rather because we care about our relationships with others. And in order to have relationships with others, they have to see us as a good person, right? They need to, or at least a good enough person, okay? And then I think of it in terms of agency because you have to be able to act on that. You have to have the resources and the capacity to act on being seen as a good person so that you can connect to other people. And so this shows up for us in our everyday lives. We need to be seen as good enough people in order to work, right? In the workplace, people have to think that we are moral agents, that we're good people, that we're worthy of a relationship. We need this when we get married. Our in-laws need to see us as a good enough person, we hope, in our extended family in order for us to survive marriage. I speak from experience. And community groups, even something more simple like being in a dance group, or here I have an image of a community drumming group, right? People need to recognize you as a good person, welcome you in, let you have a relationship with them. Also in places of worship, like mosques, pictured here. So when we're looking at moral agency in the US, I found that there were three key aspects of moral agency. So the first is autobiographical power, or the ability to at least be the editor of your own life. And the second is the social basis of self-respect. So it's being able to secure the collective sense of the people around you that you want to have a relationship with, that you can be respected for who you say you are and what you're doing. And then we also need peopled opportunities. We need people to give us a chance to take on the role that we want and practice it so that we can have an intimate relationship with them and also move forward with our vision of ourselves. And my daughter, when I explained this to her, she's 15, she loves theater. She said, Mom, it'd be a lot easier if you explain this in terms of the theater. So all the world's a stage, right? And we want to be the playwright or the editor of our own lives. We want but in order to do that, we need the audience to confirm that our role is what we say it is. If I say I'm a hip hop star, right? What are you gonna say? Nobody hears. I don't have the social basis of self-respect for that, right? I'd have to do a lot for you to think that I was good enough to say that I'm a hip hop star. And I would need to practice a lot. So this is an example. So moral agency is a key driver of mental health. It's a key driver of recovery. It makes possible the intimate relationships that we need to thrive. And especially, I think, in American culture, because here you don't, you have to earn your place, right? You're not born into a certain social status usually. You have to go break away from your family, break away from home, and become a person that other people can connect with without the trappings of status. All right, so after I did this first project, I became really interested in what happens upstream. So my first book is really about people with long-term psychiatric disability, people who've experienced homelessness, addiction, and I wondered what does this experience of psychosis look like well before all of that happens, right? Early on, first occurrence, and right around this time, lucky for me, there was a new attempt to create early intervention services that were also trying to recruit people as early. So I decided to work alongside early intervention services to see how I could, help them, but also to see how they were doing what they did. So early intervention services are trying to prevent long-term negative outcomes like interpersonal violence, suicide, rehospitalizations, and they're thought to be good for governments. They're cost savings. There's cost saving, and we actually have 10% of our federal block grant to the states now is dedicated to early intervention services specifically for psychosis. So that's a lot of federal funding, and so a lot of states are developing these programs. So what I found early on is that what they said they needed help with early on is that 50% of young people did not show up for even their first follow-up appointment after they were in the hospital for psychosis. And even when they had really nice specialty services available, about 30% did not attend follow-up appointments. And so they said, Neely, as an anthropologist, can you hang out with young people and see why they're deciding not to be in care? Okay, I can do that. So I designed this project. You can see here that in the background there's the lovely Dallas skyline. To basically look at how young people make decisions about treatment after their first episode of what we are labeling as psychosis. So these are very specific people. They're in the first 3 months after, they have to be within the first 3 months of having the diagnosis of psychosis, and they can't have had any kind of antipsychotic medication for more than 3 months. So they truly are early on in this experience of psychosis. So I met them in the hospital, I recruited them there, and we followed up with them with up to 4 interviews to ask what matters to them. So the data collection was supported by an incredible team. I had a postdoctoral fellow working with me, Anu Basood, Dr. Nia Parson, one of my colleagues, helped me with Spanish-speaking interviews, and that was wonderful help. And we had a lot of SMU graduate and undergraduate students helping. We collected about 141 1 to 2 hour interviews over time, and we visited people at home over 75 times or in the community. We had 5,000 pages or so of interview transcripts and field notes, and all of these were coded using Deduce. So our sample was pretty diverse. We ended up with 48 young persons. They were typically around 23 years old, and about half of them were middle to upper middle class, just to give you a sense, but there was a range of socioeconomic status. 73% of them were persons from ethno-racially minoritized groups, and that was 40% Latino, 30% Black, and 16% white. We also had 50% from immigrant groups, which included 23% first generation and 27% second generation. We also interviewed 19 of their key supporters. So 40 of the young people identified a person as a key supporter, and the 19 were typically women and parents, so mostly moms. We also interviewed 12 mental health providers who specialize in working with minoritized groups, and 16 Black pastors in North Texas. And so from all this data, so all this data points to, before we discuss all this data, I want to point to 2 important features of the data set. One is that intersectionality absolutely plays a role here. We have people of minoritized statuses and people who are immigrants, and they are known to be more at risk for developing psychosis. They're known to have differential experiences when it comes to diagnosis, pathways to care, and being over-medicated. So they typically have a worse experience of care in general. And also, I just want you to think about the developmental context a little bit. These are young people, they're trying to become adults with a meaningful identity. We recruited between the ages of 18 and 30. This is a time when you're more likely to take risks. You're trying to, prove yourself as a valued person in the social world, and you're trying to accumulate moral agency. So you've left home where you probably felt like a pretty good moral agent. You were on the football team, and you were a good student, and everybody in the neighborhood knew you, and all of a sudden you're at college and no one knows you, and you have to make new friends in a new place and prove yourself all over again. So this is a very specifically stressful time for young people. Okay, so now for my second point, which is that my data suggests that using culturally available mythos is an adaptive strategy to preserve moral agency for young people who are overwhelmed by unusual mental events. All right, so first of all, one of the first things that comes up when I think about these groups, the people that we interviewed, is what is reality? So the young persons had a sense of reality, and their families had a sense of reality, and it was shared originally. And so Sue Estroff, who wrote a book about long-term psychiatric clients in the American community, said most of what we know to be real is what we share with others. So reality is consensual, and it's something that we build together. But a lot of the young people that we talked to early on, they were experiencing what we would call a non-consensual reality. So it didn't make it less real for them. It was just not something that other people shared with them. So this is Amy, and Amy was trying to hold her consensual reality and her non-consensual reality at the same time. Amy had been through a lot of challenges with schooling, employment, the death of parents, and she had helped her brother raise his children. And when she was having a lot of trouble keeping employment, her sister decided that she could come and live with her and help raise her children. And so she was living with her sister, and she was having these really bizarre experiences of feeling like there were things zapping her in the chest. And so it was, and she was feeling kind of mentally confused and tired. So she started taking more of her Adderall, more of her ADHD medication, to the point where her prescription started to get, not work. She couldn't get the refill she wanted. That was very stressful to her. And all of a sudden, she started to feel very uncomfortable with the way that her sister and her brother-in-law were interacting with their children, particularly around bedtime. And she became very fixated on the idea that they were molesting their children when they were reading them bedtime stories. This was extremely distressing to everyone in Amy's family. This was extremely distressing to Amy's sister and brother-in-law. And they asked her to leave, to move out and to go back to the brother's house. And so Amy does, she leaves the house, and they put her on a bus, and she's wandering around a city, her brother's city. And so she's had this experience where she's tried to be the playwright of her own life. So she thought that she was a superhero and that she'd been sent to save her niece and nephew from the parents molesting them. But when she called the school nurse and asked her to check the children, and they initiated an investigation with Child Protective Services, her non-consensual reality was not confirmed. Her audience, her family, the nurse, CPS, nobody was agreeing with this. So her version of herself as a superhero trying to save these kids was not working. And so she was not given a peopled opportunity to, well, she was at first, but then she lost her moral agency, basically. She tried practicing her role, she lost it. So Margaret Urban Walker, who's a feminist philosopher, I think is really useful for thinking through these things. She wrote in a book, Moral Understandings, that as humans in community, we need to keep on keeping straight who we are and who we have given others to understand we are in moral terms. We also need to sustain or refurbish our understanding of moral terms themselves, of what it means to talk about kindness, respect, friendship, or obligation. And so Amy's family and everyone around her did not feel that she was keeping straight who she was or who she had given others to understand that she was. And she was not following the rules of kindness, respect, friendship, or obligation. So I call this a moment of moral breakdown. So it's a moment when the people that you love the most, even the people that you love the most in the world and who really love you, can no longer see you as a good person. It's a complete incomprehensibility between a person and their loved ones. And it's when taken for granted, ideas about what is good and beautiful and true just are no longer shared. And this was happening to everyone that I met in the hospital after their first emergency hospitalization. So I started to, looking at the data, we're all asking ourselves, how does this happen? How does Amy get to a point where she's accusing her sister of molesting her children when it's not true? And what we found is that there's a very slow process with psychosis. It's very enticing, almost seductive. It starts off with these nice little waves that look pretty offshore, and you're kind of curious about them, and people go out and try to play in the waves a little bit, sort of explore, what is this nice voice that's advising me to do this or that. And James, in the 3rd week at the hospital, he told us, so that's the worst part. That voice sounds believable, so we start believing in it. And since you're in that psychosis, you're already psychotic. You just believe it without a doubt because it's your mind. So you're like, you just believe your own mind, and that seems perfectly reasonable. So they're having these very self-affirming, self-confirming experiences. I think of it as a loop. Once you're stuck in this loop, it keeps interacting with you. It's almost like an artificial intelligence. You're having a relationship with it, and it seems very correct. So now you're kind of getting into deeper water, and the waves are getting bigger, and your senses are becoming more and more overwhelmed. Remember Amy talked about zaps? Karina talks about feeling like an amoeba. She says, my brain, it felt like an amoeba, and you don't know how long it's going to last. You can't necessarily control your body. You just can't function. Like, you can't do anything really. All you can do is sit there and try not to freak out. This is 3 weeks, so she's at home at this point after the hospital. So she's also having an embodied experience. We have so many examples of this. So at this point, things are getting really overwhelming, right? The wave is huge, and now you're in the breaking point. So this is what I think of as the place where the break happens. Like, you're completely breaking with reality. Unfortunately, that also means you've had a moral break with everybody around you, and your senses are overwhelmed. You're having trouble processing any of this. So here's an example of someone having this experience. We're meeting with him in the hospital emergency room. We're in a glassed-in cube where we're supposed to sit for security reasons, so people can see us, make sure we're not harming them, they're not harming us. Marcus, what are your goals for the next few years? I want to be the best that I can be. That's great. I want to prove that I'm the best one to do it. Keep working with people I need to work with so that I can have my business at all times. Stay focused. But we see Marcus is trying to be a moral agent here, right? He's trying to show us he's a good person. He's focused on his business. He knows how to do it. He's going to be good at it. Then he gets very quiet. It's way too long. There's a very long pause in the recording. It's like 2 minutes. Are you distracted by someone? Who is it? Someone who guides me. Guides you? Yeah? And we had to end the interview because he was so consumed by this person who guides him out there that he couldn't connect with us any longer. So in the breaking point, people start to have these, sort of epiphany-like experiences. These have certainly been written about before. Karina, she says, the dots started connecting and it was so obvious. My real name was Karina, not Karina, and I was really an angel sent from beyond the veil. And my parents were not real. They were imposter demons trying to kill me. And she actually talked about that even when we first met her in the hospital. She was very, very quiet and frightened, but she was talking about the demons. And then this is Amy. So after she dropped off in the unfamiliar city, or in the city where her brother lived, where she had never gotten off at the bus station before, she's still really feeling like a superhero, and she finds herself on an overpass and all these trucks and cars are rattling by, and she says, it just popped in my head, I should jump off the bridge to see if it's real, to prove that it's not real. I mean, either way, it would be better for her, right? In her mind. I didn't do it, but I could have. I'm sure lots of people do. I'm sure there's lots of worse stories. And luckily, Amy did not jump off the bridge because I met her in the hospital a few days later, but she did ask police who were nearby for help. They did help her. They could tell that she was off, and they took her in. Here's David. David was in college, and he was in a college near where his father lived. And he just had a lot of trouble with the college, with roommates, with police, and they expelled him. So he needed to go home, and he wanted to go home. He wanted to stay with his mom. And so his dad was trying to put him on the airplane to send him home to be with his mom. But David was on the jetway he was just overwhelmed by this need to tell everyone that they should repent. So he started proselytizing at the airport to everyone on the jetway, and he ends up getting pulled off the airplane by an air marshal. And his father takes him to a gas station and then has the police come and pick him up and take him to the hospital. David really thought he was a prophet, and he really thought he was helping people and that the end of the world was coming, and he was just trying to tell them that. I know that people who do not believe what I can see because they can't see, the first thing they say is he needs to get his brain checked and be healthy. Even my dad, who is a Christian, does not believe me, and it hurts. If I was a preacher or a prophet, or if I was walking on water like Jesus, then everybody would be like, okay. Some people would be like, oh, he's doing magic. So David could, he wanted to be seen as a good person, and he wanted to have this identity. He was trying to connect with other people and in a valued way. They're all supposed to do that, right? They're becoming adults. So unprompted, to my astonishment, 4 out of 5 young adults told us that they were superheroes, prophets, celebrities, or angels. All of them were having a very positive experience, not necessarily of psychosis, or what we might call psychosis. For example, Karina thought her parents were demons, but she herself was having a positive experience of her role in that world. And she was trying to, I think that they were all trying to preserve or restore their moral agency with other people. So they were taking on these sort of super identities in an attempt to reconnect with other people. Unfortunately, that was backfiring for all of them, right? The people at the airport did not want David to rescue them from the end of the world. And Amy's, brother and sister did not need her to be a superhero for their children, etc. So this leads to isolation and stigma and further moral breakdown. So I was super curious about this. And so I started to think of this as kind of a strategy. Why are they all using this strategy of trying to reconnect with people with these identities? And then I started reading the work of user survivors. And so there are people who've had lived experience of psychosis. This is by Wouter Kusters, who is a self-identified mad philosopher. He's written a lovely book called The Philosophy of Madness. That's even translated. He says, the mad world abounds with Jesus characters, many visitations, revelations, prophecies, gods, and demons. Far from being meaningless, these are themes of vital importance that also animate the ideas of philosophers, mystics, poets, shamans, absurdists, magical realists, and many others. So these are the kinds of ideas that other people have. Rufus May, who's a clinical psychologist who's had lived experience of psychosis, he sees his experience of the magical world as a way of protecting himself. A magical child emerged from my psyche to protect me from the loss of roles and relationships. So to me, I see this, and I see that Rufus May was also trying to protect his moral agency, right? He wanted to be seen as a good person. This magical child was going to help him connect to other people again in a meaningful way. Sasha DeBrule, who's the founder of the Icarus Project, which is because it's no longer called the Icarus Project, now it's called the Fireweed Collective, but there's a huge online community of people who are experiencing bipolar disorder. He wrote a book called Maps to the Other Side, and he said, the mythical realm is my protective shell. They say the shaman swims in the waters the schizophrenic drowns in. I stop being able to tell what's me and what's everyone else. I start thinking I'm the entire universe, the center of everything. It's so beautiful and glorious until it turns ugly. So that's what's happening for all of the young people. They have these strategies to try to restore moral understandings between themselves and the people around them based on shared cultural mythos, like being angels or superheroes or celebrities. I didn't talk about Jane's celebrities, but it's backfiring. It's actually making things much worse. So here we're in the hospital, and Ariana has been having this experience. She's actually been brought in by her pastor and her mom. She's feeling pretty demoralized, and she said, people think I'm crazy. And I said, well, what do you think? And she said, I think I'm a good girl trying to save the world. It's just not very easy to do. So Amy, after she doesn't jump off the bridge, the police do bring her in. And so they took me to the hospital, and okay, the police took you in here. Yeah, and of course they admitted me. I was going crazy. And the first night they admitted me, they had a camera where they had to take a picture. And I guess it set me off. She did not want to be photographed like that. She was very concerned about appearance. And I tried to smash it, and they had to put me in 4-point restraints. So, yeah. So how do you feel now about what they've done? It's pretty humiliating. Yeah. And I remember I was actually the interviewer there, and we just stopped the recording, and I just held her hand for a little while because she was really bummed. All right, so here we have a bunch of people who we've now seen. They've all been working on their moral agency. They've tried to be the playwright or the editor of their own lives in spite of these really unusual mental events that have broken over them in this tremendously overwhelming wave. They've tried to present this to their audiences, to the people they love who are important to them, and they've been shot down. And not that those people were wrong necessarily to shoot them down, but that's how they feel, and they're feeling very demoralized.
Can I ask and clarify one thing?
Sure.
I think I know the answer, but it strikes me that so all of these cases that you just talked about, they were all involuntarily admitted, weren't they?
No. For example, no. There were some people who did come in. I would say about half of people, I have the exact numbers, but about half of them came in involuntarily, but some of them did walk through the front door. And even Amy, I think she wanted the police to help her. And so she went in voluntarily. Yeah. She wasn't involuntarily committed. If that's what you mean. But they were all emergency situations. So these aren't people showing up at their family practitioner.
I was just kind of curious about that in terms of especially the agency piece. Because at that point, they're relinquishing their agency, at least temporarily.
Yes, if they're voluntary, then but they don't know what they're doing because it's their first time. They have no idea. They want help. In fact, there's another chapter about this, right? But their idea of what their hospital experience is going to be is completely different from what their hospital experience is. It's completely different from any hospital experience you've ever had, right? They put her, probably for a good reason, but they put her in 4-point restraints. That doesn't usually happen when you break your leg, So did I answer your question? Okay. And there's reasons for all of this. I understand it's structural in many ways, but okay. So it does not have to be this way. There are many structural problems with the hospital that we could talk about in a different talk. But today I'm thinking about what we can do for young people around this area of the shared mythos, because they're trying to reestablish their moral agency with it. And is there a way that we can better support them if we are aware of this? So I think there's a precedent for this. So we have this lovely Sufi poet, mystic, Rumi is easy. The best way I can say his name, most people will recognize, who calls on the power of myth all the way back in the 13th century. He says, "Do not be satisfied with the stories that have come before you. Unfold your own myth." And I think that this is the kind of invitation that the young people are engaging with and engaging in. There's another spiritual teacher named Richard Rohr, and he's a Franciscan priest. He says, if we don't learn to mythologize our lives, inevitably we will pathologize them. So I almost feel like there's kind of a wisdom in what the young people are trying to do. They're trying to find a connection to other people, and they're relying on ancient stories in order to do this. So there are some anthropologists who talked about this a little bit. Ellen Corin, Tara Rangaswamy, and Ramachandran Padmavati all talked about this in terms of cultural toolkits, is what they called it. And they had one specific example from South India that I'll share with you in a minute. But I think the idea of cultural toolkits to help people manage these early psychosis moments that are mythologically significant for them can be valuable. And I think they're especially valuable if we think about them in terms of being ways to guide and offer training and support for people. So Corinne and her team talk about in South India how there's a young Hindu man with early psychosis who believes that he's Elijah. And that doesn't really resonate with his community because he's Hindu and Elijah is a Jewish prophet. And so, but rather than reject him or sort of put him down, they find him support. So they go and find a local priest who can talk to him about, so his father supports him. He says, I understand you're Elijah, let's talk to the priest. And so they go and they find the priest, they talk to the priest about it. And slowly he starts to get better as Elijah. And so his family's worked with him, the community's worked with him, and he's able to heal and stay connected to other people. So his moral agency isn't as threatened in this situation. And another example from an article by 3 people who have, 2 of them have lived experience of psychosis. They interviewed some folks and they talk about one, Levi, who's a secular Jew, but he had some pretty strong Christian ideas about what was going on with him. And he found an online community of Christians who were excited to talk to him about that. And so he had his autobiographical power, he had his audience, to have some social basis of self-respect, and he had peopled opportunities to try out his prophecies and see how they were working with people. He found a way to be mutually supported. Sasha DeBrule, who founded the Icarus Project, he says, all the people I knew, so he created a mutual support community online, and they also initially had a commune, actually outside of New York City. But he says, all the people I knew who had been considered mentally ill or mad were like the mutants in the comic books, the misfits who had to carve their own paths or else be eaten by the world around them. The mutant teenagers were me and my friends, but most of us had never had mentors and guides to lead us through to the other side and teach us how to be superheroes. We just had each other. And so one of the early Icarus project activities was to have a superhero training for people so they could understand how to be superheroes for each other with the around the experiences of psychosis. And in order to do this, they took back some autobiographical power by claiming it was a dangerous gift to be cultivated and taken care of, rather than a disease or a disorder needing to be cured. So they were guiding themselves and they were finding their own way, but they were supporting each other, so they still had their moral agency in place. I think that's really important. Very recently, in 2021 and 2022, there's been some really interesting research out of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa about training called Ukutwasa. And it's about, it's a multi-year training, and it's a way of becoming a traditional healer or a sangoma. Here you see this is actually a drawing of an initiate. And so they are diviners, they connect with the ancestors, and the training involves music and dance and learning how to communicate with ancestors. And they're also trained how to control overwhelming perceptual changes. So they maybe can face that wave with a little more strength. And they're finding in a 3-year follow-up study that not only, I think that it's a very small sample, 7 people, but several of them no longer even have psychosis. They don't meet criteria for psychosis anymore. And then the ones that do still have psychosis have less frequent and less distressing symptoms. And also they all have a job because they can all work as sangomas after this. And in case you think that's too far away, we have a woman who actually trained in Ukutwasa, Gogo Ekaya Esima. And she's an initiated sangoma healer, and she offers workshops in the US for people with psychosis to learn to go through similar training and connect with and learn how to connect with their ancestors and understand their special gifts. Another person is Egan Bidwa. He's a Maori healer, and you can't really offer his training because it's passed down in families, this gift, but he has what is locally seen as a culturally valued skill and ability to connect with ancestors again. And so you find that, his family supported him around this experience, and they helped him find training, and then his community supported him in finding a meaningful social role. So he also did not lose a lot of moral agency based on his psychotic experience. Okay, so I think we've got the moral agency part. So here are some conclusions. So I've made 3 main points, which hopefully make more sense to you now. Moral agency is important for mental health and social belonging. The data suggests that using culturally available mythos is an adaptive strategy to preserve moral agency for young people overwhelmed by unusual mental events, and that we should consider the importance of shared mythos for moral agency and create supports. So young adults are experiencing early psychosis and they're mobilizing culturally available mythos to adapt, but without guides or allies or communities of support, this can increase confusion and backfire, make things actually worse. And routine dismissals of these experiences definitely does not help because it makes people more afraid of their experiences and it isolates them more and they retreat more and they're afraid to share more. And so it just compounds itself. And so I think that people having these kinds of experiences definitely need guides and allies, and we all could be more compassionate and thinking about what they're trying to do when they're sharing these ideas. Luke Kiernan, who has had experiences of psychosis himself, he's a poet and an anthropologist and an artist. He says, to view these experiences like psychosis as endpoints, as brief silences, or as something discrete and outside of their larger context is dangerous, both ethically and academically. They have sonic reverberations, consequence, and as the night can fall fast, we should be astute and boundless, and mobilizing agency and becoming, of injecting compassion into that lifeblood to assuage the burden of self, of taking responsibility, of listening. And so I think that we could develop more cultural toolkits around these kinds of early experiences to help people be less afraid, less isolated, and help them, protect and preserve their moral agency. That's what they're trying to do. We can help them do it too. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.